Don't turn away from me. I am waiting for you. My child, I know the spaces where you hide. I see the quiet corners of your life where you retreat when the burden becomes far too heavy to bear. You wrap yourself in silence, convinced that if you just work a little harder, think a little longer, or carry the weight a little further, you can fix everything on your own. But I am standing right here. I am calling your name in the stillness, not to demand an explanation for your struggles, but to offer you rest. I know there are times when you feel you have disappointed me, times when the shame of your circumstances makes you want to pull away from my presence entirely. But nothing you have done, and nothing you are going through, could ever change the depth of my unconditional love for you. I am a patient father, and I will wait for you as long as it takes. But my heart yearns to give you peace today. I want you to understand that you do not have to carry the world by yourself. Let me show you what it looks like when a heart tries to hide from my grace, so that you might recognize the reflection in your own mirror. I want you to look at a man who felt exactly the way you might be feeling right now. His name is David, and he is a 45-year-old small business owner, a devoted husband, and a hard-working father. For years, he poured his sweat, his tears, and his every waking thought into building something meaningful for his family. He started his company with a dream, a handful of savings, and a desperate desire to provide a life of absolute security. He wanted to be the steady anchor his wife and children could always rely on, the one who never faltered, the one who always had an answer. And for a long time, he was exactly that. He was the man who knew how to weather the storm, the man who carried the burdens of his employees and his family without ever complaining. He took immense pride in his ability to solve any problem that came his way. But life in this broken world is unpredictable, and the relentless waves of hardship have slowly eroded his strength. The economy shifted. Unexpected expenses piled up, and the safety net he worked so hard to weave has completely unraveled. Tonight, David is sitting in his darkened office, long after the rest of his staff has gone home to their families. The sun went down hours ago, taking with it the busy, distracting sounds of the city, leaving only the hollow hum of the streetlights outside his frosted window. The silence in the building is deafening. The only illumination comes from a solitary, brass desk lamp that casts long, tired, yellow shadows across the peeling paint of the walls. It is a cold, lonely light. David sits completely still, his posture completely defeated. He is staring at a stack of past due notices. They are spread out in front of him on the scratched wooden surface of his desk, like a map of his greatest failures. Final warnings. Red ink. Envelopes that scream of debts he absolutely cannot pay, and promises he can no longer keep. The harsh letters blur together as his eyes sting with a bone-deep exhaustion. He picks one of the letters up, feeling the cheap, stiff paper between his trembling fingers, and the reality of the numbers printed on the page hits him like a physical blow to his chest. He calculates the math in his head over and over again, hoping against hope that he made a mistake, hoping that somehow a miracle check will arrive in the morning mail. But the math is stubbornly, painfully correct. He does not have enough. He cannot save the business he built from the ground up. He dreads the conversation he will have to have with his wife when he goes home. The man who always fixed everything is now completely out of answers. He drops the paper back onto the pile, buries his face in his calloused hands, and lets out a ragged, defeated sigh that seems to echo forever in the empty room, in that profound, desperate silence. I reach out to him. David feels a subtle, urgent tug in his heart to pray. It is not a loud, overwhelming voice, but a gentle, persistent knocking at the door of his spirit. It is my invitation. I am whispering to him to simply lift his eyes, to surrender the heavy burden, to just say my name aloud in the empty room. I am right there with him, closer than the very air he is struggling to breathe. I want him to know that he does not have to be the savior of his own life, because he already has a Savior who loves him fiercely. But David ignores it out of shame. The walls of his pride and his crushing guilt are incredibly thick. He thinks to himself that a real man should be able to provide for his family without begging for a miracle. He thinks that coming to me now, only when he is completely broken and empty-handed, is the ultimate act of hypocrisy. He remembers the times he skipped church to work on Sunday mornings, the times he relied on his own bank account instead of my provision, and a dark, heavy blanket of inadequacy wraps tightly around his shoulders. He believes the terrible lie that he must clean up his own mess before he is worthy to sit at my table. He tells himself he will pray tomorrow, once he figures out a plan to pay the electricity bill. He pushes the holy prompting away, believing he is too much of a failure for me to want anything to do with him. My child, listen carefully to what I am telling you, because I am speaking to your heart just as much as I am speaking to David. You must understand the beautiful, unfathomable truth about who I am. God's urgent call isn't one of anger, but of a father desperately wanting to comfort his child. When you feel that gentle knock on the door of your heart, especially in your darkest, most shameful moments, it is never because I am coming to scold you. I am not standing outside the door of your heart with a ledger of your financial failures or your past mistakes. I am not crossing my arms, waiting for you to apologize for not being strong enough to handle life on your own. When I call to you in your moments of deepest despair, I am coming with wide, open arms. I am coming with grace that washes away every single trace of inadequacy and fear. I am the Father running down the dusty road to embrace the exhausted child who feels completely unworthy to return home. My urgency is not born of frustration or disappointment. It is born of an overwhelming, fierce, protective love that absolutely cannot bear to watch you suffer in isolation. I see every tear you hide from the world. I feel the heavy, racing beat of your anxious heart. I want to take the heavy yoke from your trembling shoulders and give you my perfect peace, a peace which passes all earthly understanding. I am knocking because I want to sit with you in the dark until the brilliant light of dawn returns. But David cannot see through the thick fog of his own shame, as David tries to drown out the quiet voice calling him. The weight of his silence only grows heavier, pushing him further into isolation. He pushes his heavy leather chair back from the desk, the harsh scraping sound violently cutting through the quiet room. He begins to pace the worn carpet of the floor, his mind racing with desperate, frantic plans that deep down he knows will never work. He tries to convince himself that he just needs a few more hours of work, a little more focus, a brand new strategy that will somehow fix everything by sunrise. He grabs his keys from the desk and reaches for the switch on the small brass lamp, turning it off and plunging the entire office into complete, suffocating darkness. The physical darkness in the room perfectly matches the cold, empty feeling expanding in his chest. He walks out the door, locking it securely behind him, entirely convinced that he is completely alone in his fight for survival. He leaves the brick building and steps out into the biting cold night air, pulling his collar up and wrapping his coat tight against the chill. He keeps his head down as he walks toward his car, deliberately avoiding looking up at the sky. He is completely unaware that the very help he desperately needs, the Father who loves him beyond measure, is still walking right beside him, matching him step for step, waiting patiently for the moment he finally stops running. My child, I want you to walk with me into the cold night as David leaves his office. His drive home feels like navigating through a thick, suffocating fog. The heater in his old sedan blasts dry air against his frozen hands, but the chill he feels is buried deep within his bones, far beyond the reach of any physical warmth. Every red traffic light he stops at feels like an accusation, a glaring reminder that his life has ground to an agonizing halt. He watches the happy, oblivious families in the cars next to him and wonders how he became so disconnected from the world of the living. When he finally turns into his driveway, the gravel crunching beneath his tires sounds like breaking glass. He sits in the idling car for a long time, staring at the warm, golden glow spilling from the front windows of his home. That light used to represent his greatest achievement, his sanctuary. Now, it just feels like another heavy expectation he is failing to meet. He turns the key, killing the engine, and the sudden silence in the cabin is deafening. He takes a deep, shaky breath, physically bracing himself for the performance he is about to give. He rolls his shoulders back, pastes a hollow smile on his tired face, and walks through the front door. The house smells of cinnamon and the faint, lingering scent of the dinner he missed hours ago. In the living room, illuminated by the soft light of a single reading lamp, sits his wife, Chloe. She is curled up on the worn fabric of their sofa, a book resting unopened in her lap. She has been waiting for him. She always waits for him. Chloe looks up as he steps into the room, and the relief in her eyes is instantly replaced by deep, knowing concern. She knows him better than he knows himself. She sees past the forced smile, past the straightened posture, straight into the hollow exhaustion that is carving dark circles under his eyes. She sets her book aside and stands up, closing the distance between them. She reaches out, her warm hand gently touching his rigid forearm. Her voice is soft, tender, and filled with a desperate desire to understand. She asks him what is wrong. She asks him to please just tell her what is eating him alive. My child, I want you to pay close attention to what happens next, because it is the exact same thing you do when the weight of your own world becomes unbearable. David looks at the woman he loves more than life itself, the woman he promised to share everything with, and he lies to her. He gently but firmly pulls his arm away from her comforting touch. He tells her it is just a tough week at the office. He tells her not to worry. He looks her right in the eyes and says, "I've got it handled." He mutters an excuse about needing a shower and walks past her, leaving her standing alone in the quiet living room, her heart breaking for a husband who refuses to let her in. Why do we do this? Why do you do this? It is the devastating power of shame. Shame is a master builder, my child. It takes your failures, your fears, and your insecurities, and it uses them as bricks to build thick, impenetrable walls around your heart. Shame convinces you that if the people who love you truly saw the mess you are in, if they saw how completely out of control your life has become, they would turn their backs on you. Shame tells you that your value is entirely tied to your success, your strength, and your ability to provide. And so, you hide. You push away the very people who are desperately trying to throw you a lifeline. You convince yourself that you are protecting them from your burdens, when in reality, you are just starving them of your true self, and starving yourself of the grace they want to offer. But the tragedy of these walls is not just that they block out your family and your friends. They also block out my light. When you wrap yourself in that heavy blanket of shame, you stop looking up. You stop talking to me. You convince yourself that I only want to hear from you when your life is perfectly put together, when your faith is unshakable, and when your hands are clean. You think that because you are failing, I am disappointed in you. You mistake the quietness of your isolated heart for my absence. Listen to my voice right now. My silence is never my absence. Sometimes the quiet you feel in your spirit is simply the sound of me waiting. I am waiting for you to stop running. I am waiting for you to exhaust yourself so completely that you finally stop trying to fix everything on your own. I do not shout over the noise of your frantic striving. I wait for the moment you finally fall to your knees and admit that you are completely empty. I am never further than a whisper away, but I will not force the door of your heart open. I stand there, patiently, lovingly, waiting for you to turn the handle. David is experiencing the terrible, crushing reality of spiritual burnout, and I know many of you are feeling it right along with him. Spiritual burnout happens when you try to carry a burden that I never, ever designed your human frame to carry. You were not created to be the sovereign ruler of your own universe. You were not built to sustain the weight of every problem, every financial crisis, and every future uncertainty. When you refuse to surrender those things to me, your soul begins to fracture under the pressure. Your prayers dry up, not because you have stopped believing, but because your spirit is simply too exhausted to find the words. You start treating faith like another task on your endless to-do list, another expectation you are failing to meet, rather than the wellspring of living water it is meant to be. You find yourself going through the motions, walking through your life like a ghost, haunting your own home. You smile when you are supposed to smile. You say you are fine when people ask. But inside, you are running on absolute fumes. You are a car driving miles past empty, terrified of the moment the engine finally stalls out completely. That is where David is tonight. He is standing under the hot water of the shower, letting it wash over him, wishing it could somehow wash away the dread settling in the pit of his stomach. He rests his forehead against the cold, wet tile of the shower wall, closing his eyes, entirely consumed by the massive, suffocating weight of the silence. He thinks the silence means he has been abandoned. He thinks the silence means his situation is entirely hopeless. He does not realize that the silence is merely the canvas upon which I am preparing to paint a masterpiece of redemption. When you find yourself in that place of complete spiritual exhaustion, my child, I am not asking you to try harder. I am not asking you to muster up more faith or read more chapters of your Bible to earn my attention. I am simply asking you to let go. I am asking you to stop clinging so tightly to the illusion of control. The most beautiful, powerful prayer you can ever pray in those moments is simply, Father, I cannot do this anymore. Those words are not a sign of defeat. They are the beautiful beginning of your surrender. David finishes his shower, puts on his clothes, and walks quietly back into the bedroom. Chloe is already in bed, her back turned to him, the covers pulled up to her shoulders. The gap between them on the mattress feels like a massive, uncrossable ocean. He slides into bed, staring up at the dark ceiling, his mind still spinning with numbers, deadlines, and a profound, aching sense of failure. He has built a fortress of pride around his breaking heart, convinced that it is the only thing keeping him safe from total ruin. But walls built entirely on human pride are incredibly fragile. They look strong from the outside, but the foundation is made of sand. The tiniest tremor of truth can bring the entire structure crashing down. David lies in the dark, his chest tight with anxiety, utterly unaware that the mortar holding his defenses together is already beginning to crack. The heavy silence of the room is suddenly broken by a soft, unexpected sound from the other side of the bed. It is a sound that shifts the very atmosphere of the room, a sound that pierces straight through the thick, desperate walls of his isolation, forcing him to realize that the relentless, quiet pursuit of grace is something he can never truly outrun. The sound that broke the heavy silence of that dark bedroom was the soft, muffled weeping of his wife. Chloe was trying so desperately to hide her tears, burying her face deep into her pillow, but the sorrow in her shaky breath was unmistakable. David lay there in the dark, absolutely frozen. His heart screamed at him to reach across the mattress, to pull her close, to confess every single failure, and let her share the burden. But the heavy iron chains of his pride were wrapped far too tightly around his chest. He chose the darkness. He committed the quiet cowardice of pretending to be asleep, listening to the woman he loved cry alone in the dark. By the time the sun finally began to rise, painting the morning sky in dull shades of gray, David was already gone. He slipped out of the house long before Chloe woke up, deciding that if he could not comfort her heart, he would simply work hard enough to buy back her security. He threw himself into a brutal, punishing schedule, working 16 hours every single day. He began substituting relentless busyness for the peace his soul so desperately needed. If you were to watch him during these long days, you would see a man running on a treadmill of absolute panic. He drinks terrible lukewarm coffee from a dented travel mug, his eyes permanently bloodshot, his jaw constantly clenched. He fills every single quiet moment with noise, terrified of what he might hear if he actually stopped moving. He leaves the radio blaring in his truck. He makes endless frantic phone calls to clients who do not want to speak with him. He organizes and reorganizes his inventory, moving boxes from one side of the room to the other, believing the desperate lie that constant motion equals actual progress. But no matter how early he wakes up, no matter how much sweat he pours into his business, the financial hardship only continues to worsen. The bank calls become more frequent and far less polite. His suppliers begin demanding cash upon delivery, refusing to extend his credit for another single week. The mountain of debt casts a massive, terrifying shadow over his life and he is trying to dig his way out with a plastic spoon. My child, look closely at him running. Look at how exhausting it is to try and outwork a crisis that requires a savior. I want to ask you a very honest question, and I want you to answer it in the quietness of your own heart. How many times have you done the exact same thing? How many of you substitute frantic busyness for actual peace? I see you filling your calendar to the absolute brim, taking on extra projects, constantly scrolling through your phone, doing everything in your human power to avoid the quiet moments where you might actually have to face me. I send you a gentle invitation, a holy prompting in your spirit that says, I need to see you. I whisper to you to just sit with me, to let me carry the heavy load that is crushing your spirit. But you wave me away. You look at the terrible mess of your life, the unpaid bills, the broken relationships, the secret habits you cannot seem to break, and you tell yourself that you need to clean up your mess before you can let me inside. You actually believe the tragic lie that your failure disqualifies you from my presence. You think you must fix your own life before you are worthy to sit at my table. But I am not a guest who demands a spotless house. I am a loving father, coming with a broom and a dustpan to help you sweep the floor. You cannot outwork your need for my grace. You can never hustle your way into peace. David does not know this yet, but there are small cracks beginning to form in his armor. Late one evening, while searching through a chaotic desk drawer for a misplaced invoice, his fingers brush against something slick and glossy. He pulls it out into the dim light of his office lamp. It is an old, slightly faded photograph of him and Chloe standing outside our small brick church on a bright Easter Sunday, nearly 10 years ago. He stares at the picture, completely paralyzed by the memory. He remembers that specific morning with painful clarity. He remembers the wonderful lightness in his chest, the feeling of absolute trust. He remembers singing the hymns, holding his wife's hand, feeling deeply and completely secure in my love. He remembers a time when faith was so wonderfully easy. Back then, he trusted me implicitly to provide for his family. He did not feel the need to control the universe. As he looks at the younger, happier version of himself, a profound, heavy ache swells in his throat. The contrast between that warm memory and the cold, terrifying reality of his present life is almost too much to bear. A quiet, gentle curiosity begins to stir in the very bottom of his exhausted soul. He wonders, just for a fleeting second, if he could ever find his way back to that simple trust. He wonders if the door is still open for a man who has wandered this far into the harsh wilderness of his own pride. But the vulnerability of that thought frightens him. He quickly shoves the photograph back into the deepest corner of the drawer, slamming it shut. He tells himself there is absolutely no time for nostalgia, and certainly no time for prayer. He has to fix this situation today. He has to find a way to save his company. But the harder David tries to fix things in his own strength, the faster the illusions he built begin to crumble around him. The fragile house of cards he has spent months trying to balance is finally catching a violent wind. It happens on a dreary Thursday afternoon. The sky outside his office window is bruised purple with an incoming storm, casting a strange, heavy twilight over the city. David is standing on the dusty floor of his warehouse, his voice raised, arguing bitterly with a vendor over a vital shipment he desperately needs, but absolutely cannot afford. His temper is fraying, his patience completely empty, his words harsh and unforgiving. And then, his cell phone rings in his pocket. He ignores it at first, assuming it is just another collection agency demanding blood from a stone. He keeps arguing, his face flush with anger. But the phone rings again, and then a third time, cutting sharply through his desperate shouting. Annoyed, he finally pulls the phone from his pocket, expecting to see a familiar local area code from a bank manager. But the name flashing brightly across the cracked screen makes his heart completely stop beating, instantly pulling the absolute final thread of his control. The name flashing on the cracked screen of David's cell phone is Richard Thompson. Richard is not a relentless debt collector or an impatient bank manager. He is the owner of the largest contracting firm in the entire county, the anchor client who provides nearly 70% of David's yearly revenue. He is the absolute last structural pillar holding up the collapsing roof of David's business. David swallows hard, his throat dry as dust, and answers the call, desperately trying to force a tone of confident, steady professionalism into his voice. But Richard is brief, and his tone is entirely cold. He explains that his company is restructuring, cutting their operational costs, and moving all their accounts to a much larger, cheaper supplier out of state. The contract is terminated, effective immediately. David begs him. He lowers his heavy shield of pride just enough to plead for 30 days, for one more small project, for any kind of financial lifeline to keep his doors open. But the line goes completely dead. The sound of the disconnected call rings in David's ear, like the final, heavy toll of a funeral bell. The phone slips from his trembling hand, clattering loudly onto the concrete floor of the warehouse. The business is not just struggling anymore. It is over. The foundation he poured his entire life into has completely shattered, and in that devastating moment, the massive dam of his emotions finally bursts. The sheer exhaustion, the bitter shame, and the paralyzing fear violently twist into a sudden, blinding rage. He kicks a heavy wooden shipping pallet, sending a sharp, shooting pain all the way up his leg, but he barely feels it. He looks up at the rusted metal ceiling of the dark warehouse, his face flushed, the veins in his neck standing out, and he screams at the top of his lungs. "Where are you?" His voice echoes off the empty, cavernous walls, rough and broken. He yells it again, louder this time. his fists tightly clenched at his sides. He demands to know why I have let this happen to him. He lists all the late nights, all the sacrifices, all the blood and sweat he poured into providing a good life for his family. He accuses me of abandoning him when he needed me the most. My child, look closely at the tragic irony of his anger. David struggles with intense pride, fear, and doubt. He has spent months actively running from my light, building thick walls of isolation to keep me out. He has ignored the gentle, persistent knocking at the door of his heart, substituting his own frantic busyness for my perfect peace. And yet, the very moment his self-reliance completely fails, he looks up into the rafters and blames me for the collapse. How many times have you done the exact same thing? How many times have you pushed my hands away, insisting that you can carry the heavy stone all by yourself, only to become furiously angry with me when the crushing weight finally brings you to your knees? You build your life on the fragile foundation of your own strength, your own bank account, your own human abilities. And when that sand inevitably washes away in the storm, you point your finger toward heaven and demand to know why I did not stop the rain. But I want to tell you a profound truth about my love for you, a truth that might be incredibly difficult to hear when you are standing in the middle of your own ruined plans. Sometimes I allow the foundations of your life to crack so that the light can finally get in. I do not bring the storms to destroy you. I allow the fragile, temporary things you trust in to crumble, because I know they can never truly sustain your soul. If I had let David succeed in his own frantic strength, if I had let him work his way out of this impossible financial hardship, he would have spent the rest of his life worshiping his own two hands. He would have continued pushing his beloved wife away, convinced he was a self-made savior. He would have lived the rest of his days as a hollow, exhausted man, entirely separated from the true peace I created him to experience. My urgency in calling out to you is never about punishing your failures or scolding your mistakes. It is about saving you from destroying yourself through your own pride. I see the heavy, impossible burdens you strap to your own back, and I know that if you carry them one step further, they will break you completely. When your carefully laid plans fall apart, when the client walks away, when the bank account reaches zero, it is not a sign of my absence. It is the painful, necessary dismantling of your idols. It is the beautiful clearing of the ground, breaking the hard outer shell of your self-reliance, so the seed of genuine, unshakable faith can finally begin to grow. David does not feel beautiful right now. He feels entirely destroyed. His anger burns out as quickly as it flared, leaving behind nothing but cold, gray ashes in his spirit. His knees buckle beneath him, and he collapses right there on the dirty, sweeping floor of the warehouse. He pulls his knees tight to his chest, burying his face in his dusty work jeans. And he finally does the one thing he has fiercely refused to do for months. He weeps. He cries with the loud, ugly, gasping sobs of a man who has absolutely nothing left to lose. The silence of the warehouse presses in on him, heavy and absolute. The sun has dipped behind the thick storm clouds outside, throwing the large room into deep, suffocating shadows. He is convinced that this is the absolute end of his story. He believes he has pushed his wife away for the absolute last time, failed his children completely, and permanently alienated the God who created him. He stays on that cold concrete floor for hours, until the chill of the evening seeps deep into his bones. Eventually, the sheer physical need to go home forces him to his unsteady feet. He drags himself toward his small office to grab his winter coat, moving slowly, like a man walking toward a prison cell. He opens the door to his darkened office, not even bothering to turn on the brass desk lamp. He reaches out in the shadows for his heavy coat draped over the back of his leather chair. But as he pulls the coat toward him, his hand brushes roughly against his worn leather briefcase, resting on the very edge of the desk. The metal clasp catches hard on his sleeve, and the heavy briefcase tumbles to the floor, spilling its chaotic contents all across the carpet. Pens, crumpled receipts, and stacks of unread mail scatter wildly in the darkness. David lets out a long, exhausted groan. He drops to his hands and knees in the dim light, blindly sweeping the scattered items together, wanting nothing more than to just leave this room and never come back. As his calloused fingers scrape across the rough carpet, they brush against something that does not feel like a stiff utility bill or a smooth business card. It feels like a small, folded square of heavy cardstock paper. He pauses, his brow furrowing in confusion. He picks the paper up, his thumb tracing a raised, embossed pattern on the front cover. He slowly reaches up and clicks a switch on the small brass desk lamp. The warm, yellow light spills across his dirty, trembling hands, illuminating the small white envelope he is holding. It has his name written carefully across the front, in a familiar, delicate handwriting that immediately makes his breath catch painfully in his throat. It is a handwriting he has known for over 20 years. It is an entirely unexpected reminder of love, surfacing in this place of total ruin, placed there silently by hands that utterly refuse to let him go. He carefully slides his thumb under the sealed flap, his heart suddenly pounding a frantic, hopeful rhythm against his ribs, completely unaware of the message waiting for him inside. My child, watch how gently I work when a human heart is completely shattered. David sits in the dim, yellow light of his quiet office and slides his trembling thumb under the seal of that small, white envelope. Inside is a single piece of paper, folded carefully in half. The words are written in Chloe's elegant, familiar script, and the ink is slightly smudged in the corner by a single dried tear. He holds his breath as he reads it. The note is very short, but it carries the heavy, beautiful weight of absolute grace. It says, David, I see the terrible burden you are carrying. even when you absolutely refuse to let me carry it with you. I love you far more than I could ever love this business. I was unpacking the last of the boxes from the attic this afternoon, and I found something you packed away a long time ago. I placed it in the bottom drawer of your desk. Please come home to me. David reads the short message over and over again, his vision blurring. His wife has not abandoned him. She is not angry at his failures. She is simply waiting for him, just as I have been waiting for him. He slowly reaches down to the bottom left drawer of his heavy oak desk, a drawer he almost never uses because it always sticks against the frame. He pulls hard, and the wood groans loudly in the silent room as it finally slides open. Inside, resting perfectly in the center of the dusty wooden bottom, is an old, deeply worn leather Bible. This is not just any book. It is a profound piece of his own history. It is a gift from his late grandfather. David carefully lifts the heavy Bible out of the drawer, his hands recognizing the familiar cracked texture of the leather binding. The pages are incredibly soft from decades of constant turning, and the faint, comforting smell of old paper and peppermint instantly fills the space around him. His grandfather was a man of quiet, immovable faith, a man who survived the brutal hardships of poverty and the terrifying uncertainty of war, not with a clenched fist, but with open, praying hands. As David lifts the heavy book with deep reverence, a small, faded piece of lined notebook paper flutters out from between the dog-eared pages. It falls gently through the air and lands softly on his lap. He picks it up, holding it close to the light of the brass lamp. In his grandfather's familiar, slightly shaky handwriting, there is a short, simple sentence. When the world is too loud, listen for his whisper. My child, pay very close attention to this beautiful truth. I want you to understand how I operate, especially when you are walking through the darkest valleys of your own life. God's urgent messages often arrive in the quietest, most unexpected ways. You spend so much of your life looking for me in the grand, sweeping resolutions to your problems. You wait for a massive financial windfall, a sudden promotion, or an immediate, miraculous healing. You want me to announce my presence with booming thunder or a parted sea, to instantly fix everything you have broken. But more often than not, I am speaking to you right now through the gentle, everyday moments of your life. I speak through the unexpected text message from an old friend right when you feel completely alone in the world. I speak through the lyrics of a worship song that plays on the car radio exactly when you are crying behind the steering wheel. I speak through the worn pages of an old Bible left behind by a praying grandparent who loved you dearly. My voice is the quiet, steady anchor, trying to hold you in place when the waves of your anxiety are crashing entirely too loud. David holds that small slip of paper, and for the very first time in over a year, the frantic, terrifying noise in his mind finally stops. The endless calculations, the bitter arguments, and the crushing fear of tomorrow all fade into the background. A profound, warm nostalgia washes entirely over him. He closes his eyes and suddenly remembers sitting on the wooden front porch with his grandfather on warm summer evenings, listening to the crickets, feeling a sense of absolute, unshakable safety. He remembers that his grandfather never had much money in his bank account. He never owned a massive business or drove a brand new truck. Yet, he was the absolute richest man David had ever known, simply because he possessed a deep, abiding peace that the world could never understand and could never take away. In this quiet, dusty office, holding the worn leather cover of his grandfather's Bible, David finally exhales. The rigid tension leaves his shoulders. He feels the very first, faint rays of my grace breaking through the heavy, dark clouds of his pride and despair. He looks at the handwritten note again. Listen for his whisper. He realizes, with a sudden, beautiful clarity, that he has been fighting a brutal battle he was never meant to win on his own. He does not have to be the savior of his family. He just needs to trust the Savior who holds his family in the palm of his hand. But the enemy of your soul utterly despises the moments when you begin to turn your eyes back toward me. The enemy knows that if you truly grasp the infinite depth of my love and forgiveness, his heavy chains of fear will instantly shatter. Just as David leans back in his leather chair, closing his eyes and preparing to finally speak my name in complete surrender, the atmosphere in the room violently shifts. The sudden, blaring ring of the office landline shatters the sacred silence. It is not his cell phone this time, but the main business line across the room. A line that should never, ever be ringing at this dark hour of the night. The mechanical, piercing sound cuts through the warm nostalgia like a jagged knife. David's eyes snap open. He stares across the shadows at the blinking red light on the receiver, his brief moment of beautiful peace evaporating instantly into the cold air. The reality of his worldly problems comes crashing violently back into the room, refusing to be ignored. A heavy, familiar knot of dread instantly tightens in the pit of his stomach. He knows that no one calls the main office line after midnight with good news. The phone rings a second time, louder and more insistent, echoing off the bare walls of the hallway outside. He slowly stands up from his desk, the worn Bible still clutched tightly in his left hand. He takes a slow, heavy step toward the ringing phone, hovering his right hand right above the receiver, fully aware that answering this late-night call will force the absolute final confrontation of his life. My child, the sound of a ringing phone in the middle of the night carries a specific kind of dread, a primal fear that tells you life as you know it is about to drastically change. David's hand trembles as he lifts the heavy plastic receiver to his ear. He does not say a word. He simply breathes into the mouthpiece, waiting for the devastating blow to fall. On the other end of the line is the gruff, uncomfortable voice of Marcus, the property manager who oversees the commercial building where David's warehouse is located. Marcus clears his throat, the sound incredibly loud in the absolute silence of the office. He tells David that he is deeply sorry to be calling so late, but he could see David's truck still parked in the lot, and he wanted to give him the news like a man, rather than letting him find a piece of paper taped to the glass in the morning. The bank has officially foreclosed on the commercial lease. Marcus explains, his voice devoid of any warmth, that the grace period expired at midnight. The official eviction notice has been drafted, signed by a judge, and will be executed by the county sheriff at dawn. David has exactly 6 hours to remove any personal belongings from the property before the deadbolts are changed and the heavy steel security gates are chained shut forever. David slowly lowers the receiver back onto its cradle. He does not argue. He does not plead. The fight has completely drained out of him, leaving behind nothing but an empty, echoing hollow in his chest. The conflict that has been slowly building for months has finally reached its absolute, undeniable peak. His business is not just failing. It is officially dead. The storefront, the warehouse, the inventory, the years of sweat and sacrifice. It is all gone. The grand illusion of his own self-reliance has been entirely shattered, leaving him standing in the wreckage of his own pride. He stands up from the desk, moving with the slow, stiff mechanical motions of a man walking in a dream. He does not pack up his files. He does not gather his expensive tools or his ledgers. None of those things matter anymore. He simply picks up the worn leather Bible his grandfather left him, folding Chloe's tear-stained note safely between its soft pages. He slides the Bible into the deep pocket of his heavy winter coat, turns off the brass desk lamp, and walks out of the office for the very last time. When he pushes through the heavy glass doors of the building and steps out into the parking lot, the storm that had been threatening the city all evening finally breaks. A torrential, freezing rain begins to fall, washing over the cracked asphalt in sheets of gray water. The cold drops soak through his coat instantly, but he barely registers the chill. He walks slowly toward his truck, each step feeling heavier than the last. The parking lot, usually a place of bustling activity and purpose, is now just a desolate, watery graveyard. He climbs into the cab of his truck and slams the heavy metal door shut, instantly sealing himself inside a small, dark box. He does not turn the key in the ignition. He just sits there in the freezing darkness. The rain pounds violently against the thin metal roof and the windshield, a deafening, chaotic drumming that perfectly matches the turbulent terror rising in his throat. Look at him, my child. Look at this man who tried so desperately to carry the weight of the entire world on his own shoulders. He is sitting in the cold, damp cab of his truck, his calloused hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles are stark white. He is shaking uncontrollably, not just from the freezing rain, but from the massive, overwhelming realization that he is completely, utterly out of options. There are no more phone calls he can make. There are no more favors he can ask. There are no more creative accounting tricks or late-night strategy sessions that can save him. The math has reached 0. This is the exact moment that human pride fears the most. It is the moment of absolute vulnerability. But what you must understand, what David is about to understand, is that this terrible, frightening stripping away of your pride is exactly what prepares your heart for my grace. You see, as long as your hands are full of your own plans, your own ego, and your own desperate attempts to control your life, you cannot receive what I am trying to give you. I do not cause the storms just to watch you suffer. I allow the violent winds to blow away the fragile, temporary things you have placed your trust in, so that you can finally discover the unshakable foundation of my love. Hardship is a severe mercy. It breaks down the thick, stubborn walls of your independence and leaves you empty and finally ready to be rescued. How many of you are sitting in your own version of this cold, dark truck right now? How many of you are staring through a rain-slicked windshield at a future that looks entirely hopeless? You have run out of money. You have run out of patience. You have run out of physical strength. And you are terrified because you do not know how to fix it. You are gripping the steering wheel of a life that is no longer moving forward, completely paralyzed by the fear of what tomorrow will bring. Listen to me right now, over the deafening noise of your own panic. Listen as I speak to David in the quiet, desperate sanctuary of his freezing truck. The voice he hears is no longer a gentle, subtle whisper. The time for whispering has passed. The spiritual pressure in the cab of that truck shifts, becoming a heavy, undeniable pull on his soul. It is a holy urgency, a massive, magnetic draw of absolute love that cuts straight through the sound of the pouring rain and the frantic beating of his exhausted heart. I speak to his spirit with a clarity he cannot ignore. My child, I need to see you urgently. It is not a request to meet me at a future date when he has his life put back together. It is not a demand for him to clean himself up, wipe his tears, and present a perfect resume of his good deeds. It is the fierce, protective call of a father reaching his hand into the dark, raging waters to pull a drowning son to the surface. I am telling him that the time for running is completely over. I need him to bring his brokenness, his massive failure, his deep shame, and his trembling hands to me right this very second. David's breath hitches in his chest. A hot, unexpected tear escapes the corner of his eye, tracing a warm path down his cold cheek. He lets go of the steering wheel. His hands fall limp into his lap. He is completely stripped of every single defense mechanism he has ever built. The illusions of his success are gone. The false security of his bank account is gone. The pride that kept him isolated from his wife and from me has been completely washed away by the storm. He is finally nothing more than a desperate man in need of a savior. He reaches a trembling hand forward and turns the key in the ignition. The old engine roars to life, cutting through the noise of the rain, and the warm yellow beams of his headlights pierce the absolute darkness of the flooded parking lot. The windshield wipers sweep across the glass, clearing away the water just enough for him to see the road ahead. He pulls the gear shift down and slowly presses the accelerator. The heavy truck rolls forward, the tires splashing violently through deep puddles as he navigates toward the exit of the lot. He is finally faced with the one choice he has been fiercely avoiding for months. The road stretching out in front of him branches in two very different directions. He could turn left, driving the familiar route back to his house, walking through the front door a defeated, ruined man to confess his absolute failure to the wife who loves him. Or he could answer the undeniable, urgent pull in his spirit, yielding to the holy command that is still echoing with massive authority in his chest. He reaches the end of the driveway, the blinker clicking loudly in the quiet cab, and he turns the wheel. He is not driving home. He is driving straight into the heart of the storm, heading toward the only place left in the world where he knows he can finally surrender. My child, follow David as his heavy truck cuts through the relentless driving rain. The windshield wipers beat a frantic, rhythmic pulse, struggling to clear the sheets of water that obscure the dark road ahead. He does not know exactly how he navigated the slick, winding streets of the city, but his hands move with an unconscious, desperate muscle memory. The headlights sweep across a familiar, quiet neighborhood, illuminating the wet, reflective surfaces of the street signs. He turns the wheel one final time, the tires hissing loudly as he pulls into the empty, unlit parking lot of the small brick church he has not visited in years. This is the place where he and Chloe used to sit side by side in the wooden pews. The place where he once felt a deep, abiding connection to my presence. Now, it stands completely dark against the turbulent night sky, a silent monument to the faith he abandoned in exchange for his own exhausting self-reliance. He brings the truck to a slow stop near the front steps. He sits there with the engine idling, the low rumble vibrating through the floorboards. The headlights cast twin beams of bright, yellow light across the heavy wooden doors of the sanctuary. The storm is absolutely raging outside. The wind howls violently through the ancient oak trees lining the property, their massive branches bending and groaning under the immense pressure. This external tempest is a perfect, terrifying mirror of the chaotic storm raging inside his own chest. For a long time, David just stares through the rain-streaked glass. The choice in front of him is incredibly clear, hanging heavy and absolute in the cold air of the cab. On one hand, he can throw the truck in reverse. He can back out of this parking lot, drive home, and continue to wrap himself in the bitter, suffocating blanket of his own isolation. He can hold on to the jagged, broken pieces of his pride and try to glue them back together in the dark. He can continue believing the tragic lie that he is completely alone, that he has been entirely abandoned, and that his failures have permanently disqualified him from my love. On the other hand, he can answer the urgent, undeniable call echoing in his spirit. He can choose to step out of the heavy armor he has worn for so long. He can choose to surrender. My child, listen to me very closely right now. I know the word surrender sounds like a terrible defeat to a weary heart. The world has taught you that surrender means you have lost the battle, that you are weak, that you have completely given up. But in my kingdom, surrender is the exact opposite. Surrender is not a white flag of defeat. It is the beautiful, welcoming doorway to absolute peace. It is simply the moment you finally stop fighting the very hands that are desperately trying to rescue you. It is the moment you exhale and allow me to be exactly who I said I would be. How many of you are sitting in your own dark valley right this very second, staring at the closed doors of a choice you are terrified to make? You have reached the absolute limit of your human strength. You have tried to fix your marriage. You have tried to cure your illness. You have tried to manage your crushing anxiety. And you have tried to pay the bills that keep piling up on the kitchen counter. You are exhausted, completely depleted, and you are hiding in the shadows of your own failure. You think you have fallen too far. You think the valley is too deep for my grace to reach. But I want to tell you a profound truth. I do not just wait for you on the bright, sunny mountaintops of your success. I am waiting for you right down here, in the lowest, darkest, most terrifying valley of your life. I am standing right outside the door of your heart, in the pouring rain, asking you to just open it. I am not asking you to climb your way out of the pit. I am simply asking you to let me climb down into it with you. David's hands are shaking as he rests them on the steering wheel. He thinks about Richard Thompson's cold voice on the phone. He thinks about the eviction notice waiting to be served at dawn. He thinks about the terrible, hollow distance he has created between himself and the woman he loves. And then he thinks about the worn leather Bible sitting heavily in the pocket of his coat and the handwritten note from his grandfather. When the world is too loud, listen for his whisper. The world has never been louder than it is tonight. David closes his eyes, takes a deep, ragged breath, and reaches down toward the ignition. With a decisive final motion, he turns the key backward. The engine completely dies. The sudden silence inside the cab is absolute and instantly overwhelming, standing in massive, stark contrast to the violent storm still raging outside. The headlights click off, plunging the interior of the truck into near total darkness. The heater stops blowing, and the chill of the night immediately begins to seep through the glass. But in that sudden, profound quiet, something incredible begins to happen. The heavy, suffocating tension that has been tightening around his chest for an entire year slowly begins to release. The bitter, angry pride that told him he had to be the master of his own fate dissolves into the cold air. For the very first time in recent memory, he feels a genuine, undeniable spark of relief. It is the relief of a man who has finally dropped a massive weight from his bleeding shoulders. He has absolutely no idea how he is going to pay his debts. He has no idea how he is going to face his employees tomorrow. The massive problems of his life have not miraculously disappeared, but the unbearable burden of trying to solve them on his own is finally gone. He opens his eyes, staring at the dark, heavy wooden doors of the church through the rain. He knows what he has to do. He cannot run anymore. He does not want to run anymore. He reaches for the metal handle of the truck door. He pulls it, and the door swings open, instantly exposing him to the freezing, driving rain. The wind rips through his hair, the cold water soaking his clothes in seconds. He steps out of the protective shell of the vehicle, his boots splashing heavily into a deep puddle on the asphalt. He does not bother to pull his coat tight or shield his face from the storm. He just walks. Every step he takes toward those wooden doors is a step away from his old life. He climbs the wide concrete stairs of the church, the rain washing the dust and the sweat of his terrible day from his face. He reaches out with a wet, trembling hand and grasps the heavy, ornate iron handle of the sanctuary door. He does not even know if the building is unlocked at this hour of the night. He does not know if anyone is inside, but his heart is pounding with a fierce, desperate hope. He presses his thumb down on the metal latch and pulls the heavy door toward him. It groans loudly against the wind, resisting for a fraction of a second before suddenly giving way. He steps over the threshold, escaping the violent noise of the storm, and the heavy door slams shut firmly behind him, instantly sealing him inside a completely different world. He stands dripping wet in the dark foyer, his chest heaving, the water pooling on the ancient carpet beneath his boots. The silence in the building is thick and heavy, but it is no longer the terrifying silence of isolation. As his eyes slowly adjust to the dim light spilling from the sanctuary ahead, he sees something that makes his breath catch sharply in his throat, completely altering the course of the night. My child, as David stands dripping wet in the quiet foyer, the dim light from the main sanctuary draws him forward. He walks slowly down the center aisle, his heavy boots making soft, squishing sounds against the worn crimson carpet. The massive, vaulted ceiling of the old church catches the faint echoes of his footsteps. At the very front of the room, illuminated by a single, warm spotlight left on by the caretaker, hangs a simple, rugged wooden cross. There are no flashing lights waiting for him. There are no booming, cinematic voices echoing from the rafters. There are no sudden, dramatic miracles that magically fix his bank accounts. There is only the quiet, overwhelming, undeniable presence of absolute peace. It is a peace so thick, so rich, and so tangible that it practically hums in the cold air around him. David reaches the front pew and simply collapses. The last remaining ounce of his human strength entirely vanishes. He falls to his knees on the hard wooden step of the altar, his wet hands gripping the smooth oak rail. He does not try to compose himself. He does not try to think of the right theological words to say. He does not attempt to assemble a perfect, polished, respectable speech to present to me. For the very first time in his entire adult life, he lets the carefully constructed facade fall completely away. He bows his head, allowing his tears to mix freely with the cold rain still dripping from his chin. And he speaks his very first honest prayer in years. His voice is nothing more than a shattered, breathless whisper in the empty room. He says, "Father, I am so sorry. I am entirely broken. I have absolutely nothing left to give. I cannot do this anymore." My child, I want you to listen closely to those words. I cannot do this anymore. That is exactly the prayer I had been waiting so patiently to hear for all these long, agonizing months. It is not the prayer of a proud man who is trying to negotiate a better business deal with his Creator. It is the raw, beautiful, desperate surrender of an exhausted child, finally reaching his arms up for his father. In that precise second, the crushing, suffocating burden of his shame completely lifts. It does not slowly fade away over time. It is instantly removed. It is washed clean by a wave of grace so profound and so real that David physically gasps for air. The heavy iron chains of his pride, the agonizing fear of his financial failures, the bitter, cold isolation he had wrapped himself in to protect his ego, they all shatter right there on the altar. The heavy yoke he had been dragging across the dirt is taken from his shoulders. He realizes, in a sudden rush of brilliant healing clarity, that my urgent call to him was never a summons to a cold, unforgiving courtroom. I was not hunting him down through the storm to punish him for losing his major client or for pushing his beloved wife away. I was pursuing him with a relentless, fierce, and protective love, offering him a warm invitation to the Father's embrace. I want you to hear this truth deep within your own weary spirit right now. I want to see you exactly as you are, not as you pretend to be. You do not need to clean yourself up before you come to me. You do not need to hide your financial ruin, your broken marriage, your deep insecurities, or your secret doubts. You do not have to wait until you have a plan to fix your mistakes before you are allowed to sit in my presence. When you come to me in your absolute lowest valley, when you drag yourself to my feet, bringing only your shattered pieces and your empty hands, you will never, ever find a disappointed judge looking down at you. You will only ever find a Savior who loves you far beyond all human comprehension. David remains kneeling on the floor, weeping openly, but the tears falling onto the wooden rail are no longer born of terror or despair. They are tears of immense, overwhelming, life-altering relief. If you look at his life from the outside, absolutely nothing has changed. His business checking account is still completely empty. The harsh eviction notice is still waiting to be executed by the sheriff when the sun comes up. The massive mountain of debt has not moved a single inch. His earthly circumstances have not magically resolved themselves in the last 5 minutes. But his soul has been firmly anchored to a solid rock that no economic storm can ever move. The immediate, unexplainable comfort of my presence wraps around his trembling shoulders like a thick, warm blanket, shielding his mind from the freezing, chaotic winds of his own anxiety. He breathes in deeply, filling his lungs with a scent of old paper, polished wood, and quiet reverence. The furious, spinning tornado of panic that had lived in his mind for over a year is completely gone, replaced by a stillness that defies all logical explanation. It is the peace that passes all earthly understanding, the kind of peace that only arrives when you stop trying to be the god of your own life. With his heart finally torn completely open and emptied of its pride, David begins to understand the true, gentle nature of the Father he had spent so long running away from. He sees that I am not a taskmaster demanding perfection, but a healer binding up his wounds. The bone-deep exhaustion of his fierce independence is finally replaced by the quiet, steady, enduring strength of total surrender. He stays there on his knees in the dim light, listening to the rain continuing to beat against the tall stained glass windows, feeling completely safe, completely known, and completely loved for the very first time in a year. But the events of this long, transformative night are not quite over. As David rests his heavy forehead against the wooden rail, closing his eyes and simply resting in the profound stillness of my grace, a sudden sound cut sharply through the steady, rhythmic drumming of the storm outside. The heavy wooden doors at the very back of the dark sanctuary slowly creak open, the ancient metal hinges groaning loudly in the quiet space. David freezes, his breath catching in his throat as he hears the distinct, deliberate sound of footsteps stepping onto the damp carpet. The slow, rhythmic footfalls move purposefully down the center aisle, leaving the shadows of the foyer and walking directly toward the altar where he kneels. The heavy, rhythmic footsteps echoing down the center aisle of the dark sanctuary make David freeze in place. He keeps his head bowed against the wooden altar rail, his heart pounding in his chest, entirely expecting a security guard or an angry property manager to demand he leave the premises immediately. But the footsteps do not belong to a harsh enforcer. They belong to an elderly man with thinning white hair, wearing a faded blue work shirt, holding a heavy ring of brass keys. It is the church caretaker, making his final rounds before locking the building for the night. The old man stops just a few feet away from where David is kneeling on the wet carpet. David slowly lifts his tear-stained face, bracing himself for the inevitable scolding. But the caretaker does not raise his voice. He does not ask David what he is doing or demand an explanation for his presence at such a late hour. Instead, his eyes soften with a profound, knowing compassion. He has seen broken men seeking refuge in this quiet room before. The caretaker slowly reaches into his pocket, pulls out a clean, folded handkerchief, and gently sets it on the wooden pew right beside David. He offers a warm, silent nod of encouragement, turns around, and quietly walks back into the shadows of the foyer, leaving David alone in the profound peace of the sanctuary. That small, wordless act of kindness is the final, beautiful push David needs. He stands up from the altar, picking up the handkerchief and wiping the cold rain from his face. The crushing burden of his shame and his fierce, toxic pride has been completely left behind on that wooden step. He walks back out through the heavy doors into the night. The violent storm has finally broken, reducing the torrential rain to a soft, quiet drizzle. He climbs back into his truck, turns the key, and begins the slow drive back to his neighborhood, his spirit entirely transformed. My child, I want you to listen to me very closely as David drives through the quiet streets. I want to tell you the absolute truth about my heart, because I know the lies the world has taught you. You have been told that you must clean up your mess, polish your life, and achieve a certain level of spiritual perfection before I will ever look your way. You believe that your failures and your massive, worldly mistakes have built a permanent wall between us. I want you to think about a story you have likely heard before. The story of a rebellious son who demanded his inheritance, walked away from his family, and squandered every single penny he had on foolish, empty choices. When that young man finally found himself starving in a muddy pigsty, completely out of options, he decided to drag himself back home. But he did not believe he was worthy to be a son anymore. He rehearsed a desperate, pathetic apology the entire walk back, begging just to be treated as a hired servant. He was convinced he had to earn his way back into his father's good graces. But you must never forget what happened next. His father did not sit on the front porch with his arms crossed, waiting for the boy to crawl through the dirt. His father saw him while he was still a long way off. His father was searching the horizon every single day. And when he saw that broken, filthy, exhausted boy dragging his feet down the road, the father picked up his heavy robes and ran. He ran with reckless, overwhelming love. He did not even let the boy finish his rehearsed, pathetic apology before he threw his arms around his neck, called for the finest robe, and placed a ring back on his finger. My child, I am that father. I am running towards you right now. When you finally stop hiding behind your pride and turn your face back toward home, you will not find a disappointed judge waiting to read you a list of your failures. You will find a father running to meet his exhausted child. My love for you is never, ever based on your perfection or your ability to keep your life completely organized. My love is based entirely on my own unchanging faithfulness. You cannot earn it, and you absolutely cannot out-sin it. David pulls his truck into his driveway, just as the darkest hours of the night begin to settle over the city. He turns off the engine and sits in the quiet cab for a moment, feeling the heavy, comforting weight of his grandfather's Bible in his coat pocket. He knows exactly what he has to do next. The spiritual battle has been won, but the physical reality of his life must still be faced. He steps out of the truck, walks up the concrete path, and quietly unlocks his front door. The house is incredibly still. He takes off his wet boots and his heavy coat, leaving them by the entryway. He walks slowly down the hallway toward the kitchen, drawn by a faint, warm glow spilling out into the corridor. When he turns the corner, he stops in his tracks. Chloe is sitting at the small wooden kitchen table. She is wearing a thick, woven sweater over her pajamas, her hands wrapped tightly around a ceramic mug of tea that went cold hours ago. She has not slept a single wink. The dark circles under her eyes reflect the terrible anxiety of a wife who has spent the entire night wondering if the man she loves is ever going to come back to her. She looks up as David steps into the light of the room, her breath catching softly in her throat. David does not put on his familiar, hollow smile. He does not straighten his posture and pretend that he has the entire world figured out. He walks over to the table and pulls out the wooden chair directly across from her. He sits down, looks deeply into the tired, beautiful eyes of his wife, and completely surrenders the very last piece of his defense. He tells her the absolute truth. He does not sugarcoat the numbers. He explains that Richard Thompson officially pulled the massive contract that was keeping them afloat. He tells her that the bank accounts are completely overdrawn, and the credit lines are entirely maxed out. He tells her about the terrible late-night phone call from the property manager, and he confesses that the county sheriff will be arriving at the warehouse at dawn to lock the gates and take possession of the building. He tells her that he has spent the last year lying to her, pushing her away, because he was utterly terrified that if she knew what a profound failure he was, she would stop loving him. He lays the complete, devastating wreckage of his professional life right there on the kitchen table between them. He stops talking, his voice cracking on the final word. He lowers his eyes to the scratched surface of the wood, completely bracing himself for the completely justified anger he expects to follow. He waits for her to yell, to cry, to demand how he could have been so incredibly foolish with their security. But the anger never comes. The kitchen remains perfectly quiet, save for the soft hum of the refrigerator in the corner. David slowly lifts his eyes Chloe is not glaring at him. Her face is incredibly soft, washed in a profound, sorrowful compassion that takes his breath away. She reaches across the center of the small table. She slides her warm, steady hands over his cold, trembling fingers. Gripping them tightly, she looks at him with a fierce, unwavering loyalty, and she speaks with a quiet strength that completely shatters the darkness in the room. She says, "David, I do not care about the warehouse. I do not care about the contract. I only care about you. We will get through this together." My child, look closely at this moment. This is exactly how I designed a marriage to function, as a living, breathing picture of my unconditional grace. Chloe's beautiful response is a direct mirror of my own heart. It is the unmerited, stunning acceptance that arrives at the exact moment you deserve it the least. She does not demand a flawless performance. She only desires his honest presence. When those words leave her lips, the absolute final barrier in David's heart breaks completely apart. The thick, concrete walls he built to protect his fragile ego crumble into dust. He leans forward, pressing his forehead against their joined hands on the table, and he cries. He weeps not from fear, but from the overwhelming, beautiful realization that he is truly, deeply loved, exactly as he is. He is not alone. He never was. They sit there together at the kitchen table for a long time, their hands firmly locked, drawing strength from the incredible bond of their renewed honesty. As they sit in the quiet warmth of their home, the dark, bruised sky outside the kitchen window slowly begins to lighten. The deep blacks turn to a soft, hazy gray, and a faint, pale golden light begins to stretch across the horizon. Morning is finally arriving, and with the morning comes the harsh, unavoidable reality of the world. The sunrise means the sheriff is waking up. The sunrise means the eviction is moving forward. The sunrise means the absolute, undeniable end of the business David spent his entire adult life building. But just as the very first ray of bright morning sun breaks through the kitchen blinds, painting a warm stripe of light across the wooden table, a sudden, sharp sound shatters the peaceful silence of the house. It is the front door bell. David and Chloe freeze instantly, their heads snapping toward the hallway. They stare at each other in complete confusion. It is barely 6 o'clock in the morning. The eviction notice was strictly for the commercial warehouse across town, not for their private residence. No one ever comes to their front door at this hour, especially on a Saturday morning. The doorbell rings a second time, a long, persistent chime that echoes loudly down the quiet corridor. David slowly pushes his chair back from the table, his heart suddenly racing with a brand new surge of adrenaline. He squeezes Chloe's hand one last time, stands up, and begins walking slowly down the hallway toward the front door, entirely unprepared for who is standing on the other side of the frosted glass. My child. The sound of a doorbell ringing in the early light of dawn carries a heavy, undeniable weight. David's footsteps are slow and deliberate as he walks down the narrow hallway toward the front door. He can see the silhouette of a person standing behind the frosted glass, completely motionless. He takes a deep breath, perfectly aware that the worldly consequences of his financial collapse have finally arrived at his doorstep. He reaches out, turns the brass deadbolt, and pulls the door open. Standing on his front porch in the crisp, pale morning air is a uniformed county sheriff deputy. The officer is holding a thick, brown manila envelope. He looks at David with a sympathetic but entirely professional expression, the kind of look reserved for delivering terrible, life-altering news. The deputy softly asks if he is David Miller. When David nods, the officer hands him the heavy envelope and explains that these are the final foreclosure and eviction documents. The grace period is completely over. The bank has officially taken full possession of the commercial property, and the locks on the warehouse are being changed as they speak. David takes the envelope. The paper feels incredibly cold and rough between his fingers. He does not yell at the officer. He does not try to argue or beg for more time. He simply nods, thanks the deputy in a quiet, steady voice, and slowly closes the front door. The latch clicks shut, echoing loudly in the quiet entryway. The fight is completely over. The worldly kingdom he spent his entire adult life building has been officially, legally dismantled. He turns around and walks slowly into the living room, the heavy brown envelope still clutched in his hand. Chloe follows him from the kitchen, standing silently in the doorway. She watches as he stops in the center of the room. The golden light of the rising sun is just beginning to stream through the large front windows, casting long, warm shadows across the carpet. David looks down at the envelope, and then his legs simply give out beneath him. He sinks down onto the floor. The thick envelope slips from his fingers, landing with a soft thud on the rug. He falls forward onto his hands and knees, bowing his head toward the floor, and he begins to weep. It is not a quiet, polite crying. It is a deep, agonizing, full-body weeping that shakes his entire frame. The heavy, protective dam inside his chest has been completely destroyed, and the floodwaters of a year of suppressed terror, exhaustion, and shame are finally pouring out. But my child, I want you to look very closely at his heart in this exact moment. He is not crying because he lost his business. He is not weeping for the empty warehouse, the repossessed tools, or the shattered contract with Richard Thompson. As he kneels there in the sunlight, the profound, unexplainable peace he found in the church earlier that night returns to him with massive force. He is weeping for the time he wasted running from me. He is crying because he finally realizes the absolute tragedy of his own pride. He spent months agonizing over spreadsheets in the dark, destroying his health, and pushing away the woman he loves, entirely convinced that he had to be the savior of his own life. He realizes that he built an idol out of his own self-reliance. He is weeping because he sees how patiently I stood in the storm with him, how gently I knocked on the door of his heart, and how fiercely he fought to keep me locked outside. He is crying tears of overwhelming gratitude, completely undone by the massive, unreasonable grace of a father who loved him through his absolute worst failures. This is the breaking point, my child. This is the exact moment of true, complete spiritual transformation. So many of you are terrified of this breaking point. You do everything in your human power to avoid falling to your knees. You exhaust yourself trying to hold the fragile pieces of your life together, believing that if you ever let your guard down, the pain will completely destroy you. You hide your deepest, most shameful struggles in the dark corners of your heart, convinced that if anyone ever saw your true brokenness, you would be rejected forever. But I am speaking directly to you right now. True healing only begins when you bring your deepest brokenness into the light. You cannot heal a wound that you refuse to uncover. You cannot be forgiven for a burden you refuse to surrender. The urgency you feel in your spirit, that gentle, persistent pulling on your heart right now, is not the urgency of an angry judge demanding a guilty plea. The urgency of God is the urgency of absolute, unconditional love. I am leaning in close to you, looking at your exhaustion, and I am saying, let me heal you now. Do not wait another single day. Do not carry that crushing weight for one more mile. Let the illusions of your own strength fall apart. Because only when your hands are completely empty can I fill them with my peace. Chloe does not leave David alone on the floor. She walks into the living room, kneels right beside him on the carpet, and wraps her arms tightly around his shaking shoulders. She holds him, resting her cheek against his back, letting her own tears fall freely. They kneel there together in the quiet sanctuary of their own home, surrounded by the worldly wreckage of their finances, yet spiritually richer than they have ever been in their entire lives. Out of this profound breaking point comes a beautiful, quiet realization. As David's weeping slowly subsides, replaced by a deep, steady breathing, he feels a literal lightness in his chest. The suffocating blanket of his inadequacy has been entirely removed. He realizes, with absolute, unshakable certainty, that he is fully and completely forgiven. The slate is wiped entirely clean. He does not know how he is going to pay the mortgage next month, and he does not know what job he will find next. But for the very first time in his life, he truly believes that I am holding his tomorrow. He sits back on his heels, taking a deep, cleansing breath of the morning air. He reaches out and pulls Chloe into a tight embrace, kissing the top of her head. The terrible storm has passed. They are bruised. They have lost everything the world says is important, but they have finally found each other again. And more importantly, David has finally found his way back home to me. But the story of a surrendered life is rarely quiet for long. Just as the warmth of the morning sun fully illuminates the living room, settling a perfect peace over the house, the silence is suddenly broken. David's cell phone, resting on the kitchen counter down the hall, begins to ring. The loud, cheerful melody of the ringtone cuts sharply through the quiet air. David and Chloe slowly pull back from their embrace, looking toward the hallway. David's heart skips a strange beat. He knows with absolute certainty that his business is entirely gone. He holds the official foreclosure papers right there on the floor. Richard Thompson has severed all ties, and the bank is completely finished with him. There is absolutely no one left in his professional life who should be calling him on a Saturday morning. Chloe looks at him, her eyes wide with a sudden, renewed curiosity. David slowly stands up from the living room floor, his knees stiff and tired. He leaves the heavy manila envelope lying abandoned on the carpet and walks down the hall back into the kitchen. He reaches across the counter and picks up the ringing phone, turning the screen toward the light. The name flashing brightly across the caller ID is someone he has not spoken to in over 15 years. It is a name that instantly sends a shockwave of absolute disbelief straight through his chest. A name belonging to someone whose unexpected return is about to change the entire trajectory of his restored life in a way he could never possibly imagine. He takes a slow, shaky breath and swipes his thumb across the screen to answer the call. The voice on the other end of the line belongs to his older brother, Thomas, a man David had not spoken a single word to since a bitter, prideful argument over a decade ago. Thomas does not ask for an apology. He simply says he heard about the foreclosure from a mutual friend, and he is driving up to see him. David barely has time to process this stunning olive branch before the harsh reality of the day sets in. He spends that entire Saturday in a total blur, packing his personal belongings into cardboard boxes under the quiet, sympathetic gaze of the county sheriff. He locks the warehouse doors for the final time, hands over the keys, and drives away from his dream. But my child, I want you to see what happens when the sun rises the very next morning. David opens his eyes as the soft Sunday light filters through his bedroom window. He lies there for a moment, waiting for the familiar, heavy anvil of dread to drop onto his chest. He expects the panic to seize his throat, just as it has every single morning for the past year. But the anvil never falls. The crushing, paralyzing fear is completely gone. His business is still gone. His financial hardship is still incredibly real, and his bank accounts are still entirely empty. His worldly circumstances have not changed a single bit. Yet, as he takes a deep breath, he feels a profound, unexplainable joy rising up from the very bottom of his soul. He feels completely weightless. He feels washed, absolutely clean. This is the beautiful, life-changing embrace of my forgiveness. When you finally stop running and bring your brokenness to my feet. My forgiveness is not something you have to wait for. It is immediate. It is absolute and complete. It does not just cover up your mistakes. It completely changes the posture of your heart forever. The shame that kept you isolated is instantly washed away by a relentless tide of grace. David quietly slips out of bed, careful not to wake Chloe, and walks into the quiet kitchen. He pours a simple cup of coffee and sits down at the wooden table. He reaches out and gently opens the worn leather Bible his grandfather left him. The soft, yellowed pages fall naturally open to the book of Matthew. He reads the familiar words of Jesus, words he has heard 100 times in church, but never truly absorbed. Look at the birds of the air. They do not sow or reap or store away in barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. For the very first time in his life, those words are not just a nice poetic sentiment. They are a massive, anchoring truth. He finally understands what his grandfather knew all along. True security is never found in a massive commercial contract, a growing retirement fund, or an iron grip on the future. True security is found entirely in the faithful, providing hands of the Father. Listen to me closely, my child. I do not always sweep into your life and perform instant theatrical miracles to magically refill your empty bank accounts. I do not wave a magic wand to instantly erase every difficult consequence of the circumstances you are facing. Instead, I focus on the miracles that truly matter. I give you profound inner peace, deep forgiveness, and a completely changed heart. I give you the quiet, steady wisdom to face your problems, and the perseverance to make wise choices moving forward. David closes the heavy leather cover of the Bible, tracing his thumb over his grandfather's name embossed on the front. His faith has been completely restored. He is no longer a terrified man trying to build a castle on shifting sand. He is finally ready to step into his new reality, equipped not with a temporary quick fix, but with a solid, unshakable foundation built on my love. He takes a slow sip of his coffee, feeling a genuine, hopeful smile touch his lips for the first time in a year. But as he looks out the front window into the quiet Sunday morning street, his peaceful reflection is interrupted. A silver truck pulls slowly into his driveway, tires crunching softly on the gravel. He watches his brother Thomas step out of the vehicle. David stands up, his heart filled with a nervous but genuine hope for reconciliation. But as Thomas turns around and begins walking up the concrete path toward the front porch, David notices something clutched tightly in his brother's hands. Something so unexpected and out of place that it makes his breath catch sharply in his throat all over again. My child, the object Thomas is holding tightly in his calloused hands as he walks up the concrete path is not a checkbook. It is not a legal document or a magical solution to David's massive financial ruin. It is a rusted, dented metal toolbox, its faded red paint chipping away at the corners. David recognizes it instantly. It is the exact toolbox their father used to carry to the job site every single morning when they were boys. It is an undeniable symbol of hard work, humility, and the unbreakable bond of family. David opens the front door and steps out onto the porch into the cool Sunday air. The two brothers stand there for a long moment, completely silent, a decade of bitter pride and stubborn anger hanging heavy between them. But the profound grace that washed over David just a few hours earlier has entirely changed the landscape of his heart. The old David would have crossed his arms, defensive and angry that his brother was witnessing his ultimate failure. But the new David, the man who has finally surrendered his fragile ego, simply breaks. He steps forward and wraps his arms around his older brother, weeping openly on his shoulder. Thomas drops the heavy toolbox onto the wooden porch and holds him tight. Thomas whispers that he heard David might need some help building something new. That moment of beautiful, unexpected reconciliation is the very first brick laid in the foundation of David's new life. His character is growing naturally through the difficult but beautiful processes of reflection, failure, and genuine forgiveness. I want you to watch how David's life unfolds over the next several months, because it is crucial for you to understand how true restoration actually works. I did not send an anonymous donor to instantly pay off his massive corporate debts. I did not perform a sudden, spectacular fictional miracle to erase the worldly consequences of his previous decisions. The bank completely finalized the foreclosure. The warehouse was sold to a different company. David had to file for bankruptcy, a deeply painful and humbling process that completely stripped away any remaining trace of his pride. He eventually finds a job working as a mid-level manager at a local hardware supplier. For a man who spent his entire adult life being the boss, clocking in and out under someone else's direction requires an immense amount of humility. But David goes to work every single day with a profound, unexplainable gratitude. He does not complain about his new reality. He works diligently, treating his co-workers with kindness and respect, because his identity is no longer tied to a fancy job title or a corner office. His identity is firmly rooted in my love. When the 5 o'clock whistle blows, he does not stay late to hide from his life. He drives straight home to Chloe. Every evening after dinner, they sit together at that same small kitchen table. They open their budget, looking honestly at their limited income and their remaining debts. David no longer hides the past due notices in a dark drawer. They communicate openly, sharing their fears and their hopes without any pretense or deception. And before they close their notebooks for the night, they join their hands across the table and pray. Prayer is no longer a last resort for emergencies. It is the very center of their daily existence. They ask me for wisdom. They ask me for strength. And they thank me for the incredible peace that fills their modest home. My child, this is what it looks like to rebuild on absolutely solid ground. I want you to understand a deep, spiritual truth that the world desperately tries to ignore. Having faith does not magically erase your daily struggles. It does not instantly remove the heavy mountains standing in your path. But faith completely transforms how you walk through those struggles. When your life is anchored in my grace, the storms will still blow, the rain will still fall, and the winds will still beat against your house. But your house will not collapse, because it is built upon the rock. You may be looking at the scattered pieces of your own life right now, wondering if it is even possible to start over. You may be thinking about the relationships you have damaged through your own pride, or the financial ruin caused by your desperate need to control your universe. The shame wants to convince you that your story is entirely over, that you have drifted far beyond the reach of my mercy. But I want you to remember what happened to David when he sat trembling in the freezing cab of his truck, completely out of options. I spoke to his heart with a fierce, protective urgency. I told him, I need to see you urgently. I am speaking those exact same words to your weary spirit today. When I call to you in your darkest, most desperate valley, it is never to issue a final judgment. It is always the beautiful, hopeful beginning of a restoration story. I bring you to the end of yourself, so you can finally discover the beginning of my endless grace. David's life is smaller now. His bank account is modest, his truck is getting older, and his home is simple. But if you were to ask him today, he would look you right in the eye and tell you with absolute certainty that he is the richest man in the entire world. He has his brother back. He has the unbreakable trust and deep affection of his incredible wife. And he walks in a constant, unbroken fellowship with me, a peace that absolutely surpasses all human understanding. The conflict in his life has been resolved realistically, replacing his frantic worldly ambition with a profound inner peace and a completely changed heart. As the sun sets on another quiet, peaceful day in David's new life, he sits on his front porch, watching the evening shadows stretch across the lawn. He opens the worn leather Bible his grandfather left him, resting his hands gently on its soft pages. He closes his eyes, breathing in the cool night air, deeply thankful for the storm that finally washed away his pride. But what about you, my child? You have walked alongside David through his darkest night and into his bright, new morning. But the heavy weight you carry in your own chest is still there, waiting for you to make a decision. I am standing on the porch of your heart right now, and the door is still closed. The night is growing quiet. The distractions of your day are finally fading away, and I am waiting for you to answer the persistent knock. I am asking you to hand me the heavy, rusted toolbox of your own failures. You have tried to rebuild your life on your own for far too long. Will you finally let me show you how to build something that will last forever? Take a deep breath. Close your weary eyes and listen closely to the quiet whisper in your soul. because the conversation we are about to have will change your life completely. My child, we have walked a long and difficult road together tonight. You have seen a man stripped of his earthly pride, completely broken by the impossible weight of his own self-reliance, and ultimately restored by a massive, unearned grace. But now, the story of David has gently closed. His chapter is written, his foundation is secure, and his heart is resting quietly in my hands. The fading echoes of his journey are slipping away, leaving only the profound, sacred stillness of this exact moment. The quiet evening has finally settled around you. The glowing screens that demand your constant attention have dimmed. The endless, frantic to-do lists that dictate your every waking hour have been temporarily paused. The loud, chaotic noise of the world outside your window has faded into a soft hum, and it is just you and me. I am looking directly into the very center of your heart. I see you sitting there, entirely unguarded. I see the heavy, invisible toolbox you are still desperately gripping with tired, calloused hands. I see the profound exhaustion hiding just behind your eyes, the kind of deep, spiritual weariness that no amount of physical sleep can ever cure. You have been running for such a very long time. You have been running from your perceived failures, constantly terrified that someone will discover you do not have it all figured out. You have been running from your deep, unspoken fears of the future, trying to outwork the anxiety that sits heavy on your chest every single morning. And tragically, you have been running from the only genuine, unfailing source of peace that can ever truly heal you. I want to take everything we have shared tonight, every tear, every struggle, and every breakthrough, and summarize it into one simple, unshakable truth that I want you to carry for the rest of your life. Do not ignore the knock at the door of your heart. When you feel that gentle, persistent tug in your spirit during the quiet hours of the night, do not brush it away. When you feel that sudden, inexplicable ache for something more, something significantly deeper than the frantic, exhausting pace of this modern world, you must understand that it is me. That is your Father calling out to you. I am not knocking on your door because I want to audit your life. I am not standing on your porch ready to present you with a detailed ledger of all the times you fell short, all the times you lost your temper, or all the times you doubted my goodness this week. I am knocking because I miss you. I am knocking because I see the massive, impossible burdens you are trying to balance on your fragile human shoulders, and my heart aches to carry them for you. I see the way you smile at your family when you are secretly terrified about your finances. I see the walls you have built to protect yourself from getting hurt again. Perhaps you are sitting there right now, reading these words and thinking that you have simply wandered entirely too far. You might believe that your specific mistakes are uniquely unforgivable. You look back at the bridges you have burned, the angry words you have spoken in the heat of your own desperate storms, or the secret persistent habits that keep pulling you back into the dark shadows of guilt. You have convinced yourself that my grace has a strict limit, a hard expiration date, and you have finally, irrevocably crossed the line. You believe the terrible lie that you are permanently disqualified from my embrace. But I am telling you right now, with absolute unwavering certainty, that there is absolutely no wilderness too deep, no ocean too wide, and no night too dark for my love to reach you. You are always welcome home, no matter how far you have run. Think about the physical front door of your own home. When you are inside, surrounded by the familiar walls of your living room, and someone unexpectedly knocks, you have a distinct choice. You can turn off all the lights, sit frozen in the dark, hold your breath, and pretend you are not home. You can let the person stand out in the freezing rain, entirely ignored. That is exactly what you do to me when you let your deeply rooted shame dictate your faith. You turn off the spiritual lights in your soul and sit in the freezing dark, entirely convinced that you deserve to be isolated and alone. You listen to the sound of my knocking, and you tell yourself that I am coming to punish you. But I will never kick the door down. I love you far too much to force my way into your sacred space. I simply stand there, patiently, persistently knocking, waiting for the exact moment you finally realize that the cold darkness is completely unnecessary. You do not need to construct a perfect, eloquent apology to open that door. You do not need to wait until you have conquered all your anxieties, repaired all your broken relationships, or paid off all your looming debts. You just need to walk toward the sound and turn the handle. The very second you open your heart to me, the brilliant, healing light of my grace completely floods the room. The terrifying shadows of your past mistakes instantly vanish into thin air. The heavy, suffocating silence of your shame is immediately replaced by the joyful, overwhelming reality of your absolute, unconditional forgiveness. I want you to experience that profound relief right now, tonight. I want you to feel the incredible physical lightness that comes when you finally stop trying to be the sovereign, entirely exhausted ruler of your own life. You were never meant to carry the weight of the universe on your back. You were created to be gently held by the one whose hands form the universe itself. If your heart is trembling right now, if you feel the warm tears welling up in your eyes, because you know, deep down in places you rarely admit, that you have been hiding from me, I am asking you to simply stop running. Right here, in this exact holy moment, I want you to take a deep, cleansing breath. Let go of the frantic, terrifying calculations for tomorrow. Let go of the bitter, stinging regrets from yesterday. Simply exist here in this quiet space with me, and let us talk as father and child. I gently invite you to pray with me now. You do not need to pray out loud if the room you are in is not entirely quiet, but I want you to echo these words sincerely in your spirit. Let this be the exact moment you finally lay your massive burdens down. Let this be the moment the heavy door swings wide open. Father, thank you for your endless patience and your overwhelming love. Thank you for standing out in the storm and waiting for me, even when I stubbornly locked the door and chose to sit in the dark. I am sharing my deepest truth with you right now. I am so profoundly tired of running. I confess that I have tried to carry the incredible weight of my life entirely on my own, and it has broken my spirit. I am bringing my deep exhaustion, my intense fears, and my many failures to your feet today. Please give me the strength to completely stop hiding behind my fragile pride. Please guide my steps and wash away my heavy shame with your perfect, unmerited grace. I completely trust you with my life from this moment forward. I do not know what my tomorrow holds, but I know with absolute certainty that you are holding me, and in that beautiful truth, I find my ultimate hope. My child, if you prayed those words from the very bottom of your open heart, the entire spiritual atmosphere of your life has already fundamentally shifted. You have been completely and totally washed clean. The heavy, rusted chains of your self-reliance have been shattered into 1,000 pieces, and you are stepping out into a brand new, glorious morning. You do not have to wake up tomorrow and put the heavy, exhausting armor back on. You can walk through your daily life with the quiet, unshakable confidence of a deeply loved, entirely forgiven child. As you prepare to close your eyes tonight, I want you to rest in the absolute, undeniable assurance of your spiritual security. Let the tight, aching tension leave your muscles. Let the frantic, chaotic spinning of your anxious mind slow down to a gentle, peaceful halt. The maker of the heavens and the earth, the God who placed the stars in the sky and called the oceans by name, is standing guard over your soul. You are entirely, perfectly safe. The terrible, unpredictable storms of this world may continue to rage outside your window. The winds of financial hardship or physical illness may occasionally howl through the trees. But your foundation is finally, permanently secure. You are built upon the solid, immovable rock of my unconditional love. And absolutely nothing in this world or the next can ever tear you down. If this message has touched your heart today, if you have finally decided to stop running, to drop your heavy burdens, and let my perfect peace wash entirely over your weary spirit, I gently invite you to type the word Amen. Let it be a physical, permanent declaration of your surrendered heart. Let it be a beautiful testament to the reality that you are bravely stepping out of the dark and into the brilliant light. You are never, ever alone. You are cherished far beyond measure. May your peace remain with us. Amen.